Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and we would like to thank you for joining us tonight for the Cybersecurity in General Practice. My name is Giuliani, and I'm the Practice Support and Development Program Officer at Central and Eastern Sydney PHN. Before we begin, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians and sovereign people of the land across which we work. I recognize their continued connection to land, water, and community, and pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal colleagues joining us tonight. And now I would like to introduce our speaker, Karen Castle, for tonight. Carol is Avant's risk advisor. She assists members by providing risk assessment, risk education, risk management, and prevention strategies. Karen has had over 20 years experience in health industry. She has worked in medical assistance and retrieval industry, where she coordinates service for numerous emergency patients requiring intensive treatment in Australia. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me back. I really enjoyed our last talk. Ironically, my computer is running very slowly today, so I hope that I won't have too many glitches. Now, tonight we're going to talk about cybersecurity. Now, this is a very topical subject at the moment. We're all very well aware of what's been happening around us with the Optus and the Medibank cyber attacks, and it's becoming a high priority business risk, really, which all businesses are facing daily. And as we know, each day there's another attack impacting business operations, downtime, recovery costs to all types of organizations. And this is a highly talked about topic amongst our members who continually look to us for information, to feed their knowledge, to seek assistance to understand why these attacks occur. They question, will they be next? What can they do to educate themselves and how to set up their systems to mitigate the impact of the attack? And so tonight we really want to discuss what is cybersecurity and why is it important? We hear a lot about it. So why is it important for us? And what is a cyber attack? And what is trending at the moment in this sphere? And what can you do as a practice on a regular basis to protect yourself operationally? And what do you need to do if you are hit by a cyber attack? And tonight I'll give you some real life cyber attack cases, and certainly like we've had another one again today. So this is one of the advantages of working for Avant, who is the biggest indemnity insurance company for doctors and practices as well. So let's get started. Right. So what is cybersecurity? Well, it's the protection of data and the systems in the networks that connect to the internet. Now, we all use the internet every single day. Now, it wasn't designed initially with security in mind, and we never expected it to be an open forum, totally accessible to the entire world. It's bigger than Ben-Hur at the moment. And the reasons why cybersecurity is an increasing problem is because of data, big data, the sheer amount of data that is out there. And there's no program that will efficiently sort and use this data, and there's no common standard. So that's when I talk about the design. So one of the other issues is the design. There's lots of well-designed programs out there, but they're all so different, and they're different types. And the internet is like a highway with no markings on it. It's got great accessibility, so we can see lots of things and do lots of things, but there's no security. There's no signage, there's no rules, there's no tolls, there's no roadblocks. It's an open road. And so then we have the dark web. And basically, this is like the Wild West. And this is where people with malicious intent can play. This is their playground. And these people are looking for the path of least resistance. So anything that you can do to make it harder for them to reduce your chances of an attack is what we're looking for at the moment. Now, I'm a risk advisor. My background is nursing. and training. And so I'm not an IT specialist. And sometimes IT jargon hurts my brain. So I like to simplify it. And you may have heard this analogy before. So it's the house analogy to sort of get a grasp of what cybersecurity is and how to protect your data from being attacked. So think of your house as being your computer. So inside your house, there's very valuable belongings. So in this case, your practice, your valuable belongings are your data, the patient's sensitive personal and medical information. And we need to keep our very valuable belongings very safe. It means a lot to us, right? Now, if a burglar is driving around the streets of your neighborhood looking for a house to rob, and all the houses have a number of security protections such as high fences, bright lighting, CCTV, except for one that doesn't, then that one who doesn't will be more likely to be the house that's targeted, because from a risk perspective, it is the house that is easier to get into without alerting anyone or putting themselves in danger. So sadly now, hackers have software that does just that. It searches the internet and your computer systems looking for security perimeters that aren't so strong or have holes in the fence or a window that's open, for example. So as I was saying, so sadly now the hackers have software that trolls the internet looking at your computer systems for any breaches of your security. So any holes in your fence, any windows that are open. And you need to make sure that you have enough security or you don't have any weaknesses in that security. And if you do, you spot them before they do. So if you have a window open, for example, you can shut it quickly before that robber or that burglar or that hacker can get into the window and into your computer systems and ultimately into your business. So why cybersecurity? Why must we have this? So all private healthcare providers and Commonwealth government agencies must comply with the Privacy Act. We know about this, which imposes obligations in relation to transparency, collection, use and disclosure of patient information, as well as information security and managing data breaches. So we're obligated to make sure that that data is safe. Additionally, all personal information captured in providing a health service to an individual is considered sensitive information, which is the subject to stricter controls under privacy law. So as a medical practice, like I said, you have an obligation to identify and report any data breaches. And sadly, medical records and health information are among the most lucrative forms of data traded by cybercriminals on the dark web, leading to a number of high-profile breaches in recent years. And we've seen that just recently with the Medibank cyber attack. And the importance for medical practices are able to operate continuously also makes them particular target for disruptive forms of cyber attack like ransomware, where files are locked until a ransom is paid. So essentially they know that you need this data to function, so the stakes are high. They think that you'll pay the ransom. And data from the Australian Digital Healthcare Agency, and this is what you're seeing on the slide, reports that only 1/3 of Australian healthcare organisations embed cybersecurity and awareness training into their organisations' policies and procedures. Can you believe that? 1/3 only. Now, 58% of healthcare breach victims report being breached due to a vulnerability for which a patch was available. In other words, it was preventable. And the Australian Crime Commission estimates the annual cost of cybercrime to be in excess of $1 billion, and that estimate is growing. 68% of data breaches are malicious or criminal attacks, and that's what we're talking about, the recent Optus and the Medibank cyber attacks. And as I mentioned, the health sector is the prime target for cyber criminals due to the critical nature of its services and potential threat to human life. And they think that health executives are more likely to pay for this reason. So put it to keep in mind. Okay, so The current challenges in cybersecurity, well, there's a few things that we're seeing here. We've got ransomware, credential malware, and social engineering. Now, you probably would have heard the first one because of recent days with the Medibank breach, but we'll talk a little bit about these now. So ransomware is a form of malware, and malware is just essentially malicious software that is intended to prevent or restrict users from accessing their systems until a ransom is paid. And the primary purpose being direct revenue generation. So they're just after the money. And malicious programs typically enter a host system through the downloading of an infected email attachment or an opening of a website that is designed to silently imprint the malware package onto the visitors. So the malware then proceeds to encrypt the data within the system before locking the user out and demanding a predetermined ransom. So this is what they do. They go in, they encrypt the data. So when you go in on Monday morning, you're locked out. You can't get it. And then they ask for a ransom in order to give you back your data, to give you a key. Now, credential harvesting malware, what is that? That is designed to obtain an unsuspecting user's personal information when they log into websites or applications. So these are those emails that you see, or on Facebook or what have you, and they're like, oh, do this online quiz, or you can win this prize to the Maldives if you enter your details here, or what have you. And then unsuspected, it's now put you into the host system, which will silently harvest relevant details, such as your usernames, your passwords, and then they're sent to an external source. And from here, perpetrators are able to sell the data onto third parties or to use it for themselves, depending on their objectives. And this is what happened with Medibank. The hackers obtained the credentials to access the data. They started downloading the data into an external file. And by the time Medibank IT security detected unusual activity and were able to stop, because there's some work effort involved there, the hackers had already harvested data for 9.7 million Australians. And then they used that data for ransom. Now, social engineering, what is this? So this is where the cybersecurity criminals regularly use social engineering techniques to manipulate human trust or elicit information as networks become more resilient in the face of cyber threats. And so they're becoming more reliant on human error to secure a backdoor into the local systems. And it can be quite convincing, actually, to the unsuspecting user. And I'll actually give you an example of where I fell for a phishing attack in a little while, but it's, just goes to show, even though we're well aware of these sorts of types of cyber attacks, we can still fall for it if we're not vigilant. So how do they do it? So these are typically the way. So spyware, which is software that is installed into your computer device and takes the information from it. So it's essentially that they're spying on you. They go in and they see what you're doing, and then they can take information. Trojan horse, exactly what we know about a Trojan horse. So it's malicious code that is hidden in a computer program or a file, and then when opened, the malware is triggered. So it sort of pretends that it's something, and then when you open the door thinking that that's what it is, and then it's like, ta-da, we're attacking you. So it's essentially what it is. A worm is a self-replicating virus that does not alter the files, but resides in the memory and duplicates itself. So it just gets in there and starts like a virus, just starts playing havoc. And malware is designed to infect and corrupt a computer to copy itself and can disrupt programs. So spyware is responsible for 26% globally. Trojan is 25%, and virus and worm combined is 23% globally of the cyber attacks. So I want to give you an example of why we need cybersecurity. And this is a well-publicized, and I'm not sure if any of you know, because this is up in the Gold Coast, but it was certainly in the media. It was the Miami Family Medical Center. And it all began as a small annoyance. They opened up early one Saturday morning, and the receptionist at the medical centre found that the clinic's front desk computer wouldn't connect to the server. So she moved to the back of the practice where the server was kept to fix the problem. And that's when it all became very obvious that something was more serious. Now, the server screen was locked, and amid an array of gobbledygook, the displaying message said, we're demanding $4,000 for the return of your data or access to your business files. It wasn't a virus, it wasn't theft, it was ransomware. So someone was sitting at a computer screen somewhere, most likely in Russia, had identified a vulnerability in that practice's operating system, and using a sophisticated code, they had reached around the world, around the globe, and hacked into a suburban medical centre's computer network, encrypting its files as well as the owner's computer system, their secure backup system even. And in the email that was sent to the owners, the hacker said that they would provide a key to the encryption if the ransom was paid. Now, at that point, ransomware had existed only for a couple of years, but we know now that that it was refined to a point that has become such a real challenge for small businesses, and medical practices are clearly among those who are being targeted. And Miami medical practice is only just one of many, many, many. And like I said, we had another one again today. They contacted us. So how do we prevent an attack? And that's what we're really here for, isn't it? We want to know what are the practical ideas of preventing an attack. Now, cybersecurity and privacy risks can impact your practice in a variety of ways. So it can be financial costs, because the cost to recover from the cyber attack and the financial impact of loss of customers or the revenue that can be significant. Could be regulatory costs or fines from the Privacy Commissioner. It could be job losses. It could be reputational damage, negative media reports, which can damage your reputation or erode your patient trust. And service availability. So cybersecurity incidents can really severely disrupt your services because you haven't got access to that data, your patient's medical records. And unfortunately, as much as it might sound like a bit of a cliche, it isn't the case of if, but when. So it's best to be prepared, guys. And with the right structures in place, you will be in much better place to respond when it does happen. So how do we prevent a cyber attack? It's really about making it hard for the burglar to break in. And then if they do, we need to be able to detect them quickly and remove them before they can take anything. And so to help you manage your security risks, we suggest, or we recommend, engaging in our IT service provider with information security focus. An IT service provider should explain what they propose for your practice and why in simple terms. So please don't think that you can do this yourself. Cybersecurity is complex and the malware is so sophisticated these days. And we at Avant really cringe when we hear stories from practice who are managing their own IT security. Like, for example, our principal doctors, like, he's fantastic with IT, he's just going to do it all. But then we find later on that they weren't even backing up their data properly, like simple things. So we really recommend that you contract an expert IT provider to ensure your practice is safe and your data is protected. And there's no one size fits all IT solution for medical practices to reduce the risk of a cyber incident. So for example, the risk profile of a busy metropolitan practice. So some of you all of you that are in Sydney with 30, some of you might have 30 doctors, you'll be using electronic health records, an online appointment system. They'll be completely different than to a solo practitioner in a remote town with limited access to the internet and to who mostly uses paper-based records. So we ask you to speak to your IT service provider to help identify your security risks by performing a security audit and risk assessment, and to implement a recognized set of basic security controls, such as what I will talk about and what's up on the screen now, the Essential 8, which can protect against 85% of common cyber incidents, and establish a vigorous backup regime. So I don't want to get into this too much, but I do want to discuss it briefly because it's important to be aware. Now, what I've got up on the screen is the Australian Cybersecurity Centre Essential 8 things that you should be putting into practice. So really, these are to prevent cyber attacks and should be considered industry standards when it comes to preparing your practice for the growing threat of being cyber attacked. So I'll briefly run through some of them, but really this is where we recommend your IT specialist to help you to comply with these as a minimum. So application whitelisting. So this is where you will specify what software is permitted to be present and active on your computer. So for example, you allow best practice, but you won't allow Candy Crush or another gaming app, for example, right? So you allow some, but you don't allow others. So it's like, what do you authorize and what do you block? So which one will you let the door open and which one will you block? Patch applications. So they're security vulnerabilities in applications and drivers accessed as extreme risk, which are patched and updated and mitigated within 1 month of security vulnerabilities being identified by vendors, independent third-party system managers, or users. So that's really wordy, I know, but essentially what this is are holes in your fence. So when there's a change in the software or an update or what have you, if you haven't updated that particular software, then you've created a hole in your fence and you need to fix it. And the way to do that is to update your software and putting a patch over your hole in the fence. That's essentially what that is. Configure your Microsoft Office macro settings. Now, this is essentially allowing Microsoft macros, Office macros, to execute, but only after prompting users for approval and cannot be changed by non-approved users. It can kind of get complex, all this sort of stuff. So that's why don't be too focused on it, but certainly these are the things that you want to be talking to your IT specialist about. So use application hardening. That's web browsers which are configured to block or disable support for flash content. So this makes the system more secure and makes the application more difficult to tamper with. Restrict administrative privileges. So that just essentially means that some of your users can't be accessing some other things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Patch operating systems, same sort of thing. We're talking about software updates and multi-factor authentication. Now, we're all pretty familiar with this. This is, you know, our banks use it, our government institution use this. So it's when you're logging on and then it will send you a specific code. So then it's that double security. And don't forget your daily backups. This is really important, and it's to be stored for between 1 to 3 months. Full backup and restoration processes are tested all the time. So we'll talk about that again. So that's the Essential 8. So human factors. Wow. So malicious content is actually the primary motivation behind most data breaches reported under notifiable data breaches scheme. But human error is the key factor. And according to the latest data from the Privacy Commissioner, 60% of cybersecurity incidents are attributed to a breach from someone inside the business. So for example, an employee may send information to the wrong person or click on a link that results in compromised user credentials, usually a username or a password. And there's lots of reports that the Australian Cybersecurity Centre receive, ranging from one thing to another, but I don't want to get into it too much because I am conscious of the time and we've got quite a few slides to get through. But I do want to say that phishing is the most prevalent cybersecurity threat in healthcare, and phishing in practice of infecting a seemingly innocuous email with malicious links. The most common type of phishing is email phishing. And when the link in an email scam is clicked, users are directed to a decoy web page, usually mirroring a login screen for familiar internal software. And once the credentials are submitted, cyber criminals almost instantly use them to gain access to healthcare system. So I recently assisted a practice where the admin staff opened an email with a remittance advice attached. Now, this is usual, like they get remittance advices all the time. And the attachment was infected with malware, and the hackers were then able to access the patient's email addresses from their database, and they ended up sending out a malicious hate mail to all those patients with those emails. Now, how could this have been avoided? Well, look at the email for a start. Good practice is to look at the body of the email. In this case, there was nothing in the body of the email. It was blank. It was just an attachment. And the other thing is making sure that you're looking at the email address. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But remember, it's your information and your patients, your money, and sometimes your livelihood, your reputation, that's at stake. So it's important that you protect it. All right. So some further tips. Now, these are what we call the 10 best practices for healthcare practices, essentially healthcare clinics. This is based from a US government, but we all refer to these. These are like best practice. And I do want to point out, and I think that you all had a recent seminar with the RACGP, but they do have a very, very helpful guide called the RACGP Information Security in General Practice to help you protect your practice. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And they also have checklists so you can refer to. Outside of that, Avant has a landing page with all that you need to know about security, how to prepare, how to prevent, detect, respond, report. And I encourage you to look at those resources. And Julie will be sending you those links after tonight's presentation. So you don't need to worry too much about making notes because this will all be provided to you. Now, first of all, passwords. We access so many online services every day that it's easy to suffer password overload. I know I do. And it might be tempting to use the same password across lots of accounts or simply change a character here or there, maybe a 1 to a 2. Well, cyber criminals use a variety of techniques to crack those passwords. In fact, these techniques are freely available and shared on the internet. So things simply like typing in the most commonly used passwords such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or QWERTY, which is the first 6 letters of the upper row of the keyboard. Popular football teams, music bands, or even, can you believe it, the word password. Please don't use that. And so cyber criminals have software that would just like a bot, and they will just go through and try all these different combinations, and they can guess billions of passwords per second. And the social engineering where people are tricked into handing over personal details through online quizzes and phishing messages, which is what I talked about before. So once a cyber criminal has your password, they can use it to commit a host of cyber crimes, like sending emails from your accounts, like that practice that I just talked to you about, withdrawing money from your bank accounts, which we've heard in the media a lot lately, accessing your accounts to share private or work files or lock you out, or stealing your identity. So the good news is that you can reduce the password burden and still have a great password security if you follow these simple tips. So change the default passwords on your devices. So many of our devices, including your home internet routers, come with default passwords or passcodes, which are easily found on the internet by cyber criminals. You need to change those. change them to as strong as you can, and we'll talk about what a strong password is in a minute. Don't use your personal information in passwords. So don't use your date of birth, don't use your car registration, don't use your children or your pet names, because they can just probably look on your Facebook account and see that, right? So make sure you're not using those sorts of information in your passwords. And turn on your two-factor authentication. So we talked about that in your Essential 8. That's important for you to do. And I said strong password. Well, actually, it is passphrase, not password. It is passphrase, and I'll talk about that now. So passwords are the first line of defense in preventing unauthorized access to any computer. So regardless of the type of operating system, a password should be required to log in and do any work, okay? So although a strong password will prevent some attackers from trying to gain access, it will slow them down and will discourage some, but not all of them, not the determined ones or the expert ones. Strong passwords combined with effective access controls will help you prevent casual misuse. For example, staff members pursuing their personal curiosity about a case event, though even if they don't have a legitimate reason to access that info. So when I talk about strong passwords or strong passphrases, it's better to use a phrase, so more than one word. And to make it a little bit easier for you, use something that you'll be able to remember. So for example, I love strong coffee in the morning, and then some special characters and what have you. Or my favorite book is 1,000 Splendid Suns. So you'll always remember that, but it's going to be really hard to have a bot that can figure that out, because it's long, and it's too many combinations that will go wrong. And don't forget to include upper and lowercase and at least one number in a special character. So that's just a really good tip to think about. One of my colleagues always says, oh, I like pineapple on my pizza. So there you go, you know hers. Next is use a firewall or antivirus software. So malware, like we talked about, such as viruses, spyware, Trojans, worms, they are the primary way that these hackers will compromise your computers. And they can be delivered by email or while browsing the web. And they can be delivered through advertisements, even while you're on the internet, those pop-ups and what have you, or you might accidentally click on something. So to prevent these attacks compromising your systems, ensure antivirus software and ad blocking browser plugin is installed and up to date, and allow automatic updates from the manufacturer. So let's go back to the house analogy. When we're talking about firewalls, that is your high fences, the barrier that separates and protects your internal network from unauthorized entry within the external public internet. So it's the big brick wall. When the internet and all these things are going around on the outside, that firewall is stopping anyone from coming in. And the antivirus is the security CCTV and the alarms within your system. So if the fence has been breached, it will then locate and remove the intruder or the malware. All right. Now, your IT service provider should advise you when to change your systems, but I encourage you to set reminders in your calendar to contact your IT provider to ensure they have performed an update, because we've seen some slack IT companies, and you need to make sure that you're onto them and reminding them. Okay, so to give you an example of why it's important to keep patches up to date, back in 2018, some of you might actually remember this, back in 2018, Argus secure messaging software, which is used by more than 40,000 Australian health specialists, so they could essentially check their results while they're at home. While there was a complex password, it was a static password that Argus created and was viewable in plain text inside a file in the Argus, in a folder within Argus that they created. once it's installed. So it's kind of like having a password to your computer systems on a notebook on your desktop. So if you access your computer, you can actually see your password. So the software distributors were Telstra Health and the Australian Digital Health Agency, so reputable players, and they provided a security update once they detected the vulnerability. But sadly, some practices who no longer use the system but still had it installed on their computers, they didn't know about this update, and they didn't update it because they said, oh, well, I'm not using it anymore. So that program that was sitting in their on their server, in their computers, it remained vulnerable because that little hole in their fence wasn't patched with the update. So these practices sadly were hacked. And so it's an important message to remove old programs that you're not using, get rid of them, and make sure that you keep up to date with your current programs that you are using. All right, control access to protected health information. So you need to make sure that all staff understand and agree to abide by the practice's access control policies. And you'll hear me say this a lot, policies, policies, policies. So each user needs to have an individual account, and the activity can be monitored. Users should only be authorised to access information that they need to know to perform for their duty. So for example, the non-clinical staff won't have access to patient clinical notes within best practice or medical director, but they may have access when they need to perform their role, example, scanning in a fax referral results into the patient file. So it's about what you need, what you actually need for your role, and then nothing outside of that. And ensure that there are reliable and secure systems in place for the electronic sharing of patient health information with other specialist patients, and when authorised, other third parties. So for example, and you all would know this, many practices are now using medical objects or HealthLink for this particular reason. So it's more secure. Control your physical access. So this is, making sure that someone just can't come around the front desk and look at your computer or access your computer. You have to make sure that physical access your physical access to your computers is secure, and it's only limited to authorized individuals. Making sure that your storage you're storing your physical devices like your hard disks or your documents are containing patient information, that they're securely stored and accounted for. And computers are protected from environmental hazards such as extreme temperatures, which is what I'm feeling right now in my office in this hot day. Limit network access. So any time that you allow someone outside of your business to access your server, it is like opening the front door to a burglar. Now, it's very appealing to use networking apps at work, but it can be, like I said, opening the door to unauthorized persons. So once they're in, they can have a look around, and then they can see what there is to find or sell or extort possibly. So you need to restrict the access to your network to authorized users and devices only. Prevent staff from installing software without prior approval, so no Candy Crush. Use appropriate encryption on your wireless networks. Separate, isolate internal Wi-Fi from public Wi-Fi that is accessible for patients, and protect Wi-Fi hotspots by changing the pre-installed password. That's what I talked about just a moment ago. And make sure public instant messaging services that are not password protected are not used. So I talked about the Optus breach, and I'm just going, in case you weren't aware of how it happened, I'm just going to give you a really basic summary of how the breach occurred. So they had their API. An API is where it's a link to allow two applications to talk to each other. So for example, on your iPhone, you have lots of applications. Now, in order for one application to talk to your iPhone to make it work, they need to have this link, this API, so they can talk to each other. So now what happened with Optus is that they allowed their API to be publicly accessible, which is normal because you need new programs and what have you to be able to link in. but they didn't create secure enough controls inside the system to restrict the access to all their data. So they just allowed the hackers to go in and have a look around. They didn't restrict them. So is essentially like saying someone in your waiting room, come and have a look at best practice at all of our patient files. That's essentially what happened. So so once the hackers discovered this, they went into the system, stole some data because they could. They did make threats, but thankfully this didn't progress further because the person was a little bit amateur, but it can show you the damage that can happen when a person has a bit of cheek, the knowledge, and they just have, you know, the courage or the, I don't know, the bravado to see what they can do, I guess. And if it can happen to Optus, we've got to be careful. So plan for the unexpected. Now, I can't stress this enough, and I'm just going to keep saying it as well. Backup, backup, backup. Hackers use malware to block access to files and will demand a ransom to regain access, okay? So malware can usually only be removed by wiping the computer and reinstalling the operating system's applications, data from backups, what have you. So it's important to keep frequent backups of all critical information systems. Now, if you were to back up to an external hard drive, then the staff member that you designate to this task must take it seriously. This role is a key responsibility for the practice, and they must have the required skills to perform the backup, to monitor the process, and to be able to restore from backup. So if you contract an external IT company, then you must ensure that they manage your backups appropriately too. And in fact, the RACGP has specific questions within their information security in general practice guide that you can ask your IT company to ensure they provide the right service to your practice. And plan for the unexpected. It's not just about cybersecurity, but about other factors as well, which can impact your data and business. So floods, fire, theft. And it's important to have backups that are stored in different locations to the practice and have a recovery plan in place. So for example, in the recent Queensland floods and the recent Brisbane floods, we had a practice that went completely underwater and they didn't have any backups. And their IT company sadly couldn't retrieve any of their data from their computer hard drive, so they lost all of their patient records. So as I mentioned, it's important to have a resilient backup and restoration process for practice data. Now, I'm not going to get into this even more because I am conscious of the time and we've still got a few slides. Maintain good computer habits. So keeping your systems properly maintained, regularly check for unnecessary programs and remove them. Like I said, keep up to date with program updates and be wary of public Wi-Fi for work-related activities because people then can get into your system. And if an incident occurs and you're unsure if your files are corrupted or if it is just a software malfunction, do not connect your backup hard drive, as this is a common mistake and that will result in the backup being corrupted. So just shut it down, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Again, so rigorous precautions should also be applied to your tablets and your smartphones that the staff use to exchange important information at your practice. And they need to be configured for maximum security. And you can see there what we've got. So interestingly, protecting your mobile data devices includes not just the physical phone, but the apps you use. So, for example, many of our doctors use WhatsApp to communicate with their patients and their colleagues. But changes to WhatsApp privacy settings, linking it to its parent company, Facebook, is now threatening the transfer of data. And what that means is that it's important to understand that it is not as secure as one may have once believed. And because there's a lot of potential that that information or those photos can inadvertently be uploaded into Facebook from the WhatsApp chat. So we're sort of recommending to steer away from that. Establish a security culture. So these recent cyber attacks on big corporate companies remind us that it can happen to anyone. So we need to get over that perception that it can't happen to me. And I'm going to share the example of how I got fooled at Avant, actually. So this one day, an email came through. It was an all staff email. It was from our IT security department, and it was advising something like, oh, use this different, click on this link to check out the new change that will be implemented next week, something like that. And it was a pretty fairly standard email that we get. It happens all the time. They send us things, oh, you know, this is being updated, go into this, blah, 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 blah. And my workload at that point of that day was pretty high. So I didn't bother reading further or pursuing it. I just was like, oh, I'll come back to it, you know, whatever. But about half an hour later, I had a colleague call me and she said, oh, did you get that email? Can you just click on the link? It wasn't working for me. So I just went, oh, okay, right, whatever. Stopped what I was doing and went in and clicked on the email. Well, guess what? It was a test from our IT security team to see how many of us employees would click on a link from an email that wasn't from the company to demonstrate how easy it can be to fall for these attacks. So there were a phishing expedition, essentially. So on closer inspection, the Avant logo was wrong. It wasn't the same. It's just subtle differences. And the email address was suspicious. It wasn't from our IT security email. And there was some slight poor grammar within the email itself. So that's how easy it can happen if you aren't vigilant. So I got fooled. Now you've heard me go on and on about policies. And if you've ever heard anyone from Avant talk about anything as we talk about policy. So you're pretty familiar with this at this stage. And remember, your policies and your procedures are your rules for your practice, and they help your staff to know what they can and what they can't do. So cyber security policies are no different. They communicate to your staff what is expected of them when it comes to handling information and protecting your practice from security risks. So at a minimum, your cybersecurity policy might cover roles and responsibilities within the practice for managing security risks, acceptable use of technology by your staff, password requirements, training expectations for staff, and monitoring of the system use and access. So your practice's privacy policy should also guide how it handles personal information. So keep it clear, keep it simple and plain English. And if you haven't got one, then RACGP do have a template, as do Avant, if you're an Avant member. And a data breach response plan is also important because it sets out the written instructions for responding to and limiting the effects of a data breach incident. So having a plan in place can dramatically limit damage, improve recovery time, and help safeguard your business. So you could just imagine in that moment when you turn up to work and you see this gobbledygook demanding $4,000 on your computer screen, what do? The patients are coming in, you're in a flap, you go to your response plan. It is in a systematic order, so it will help you. All right, so how do we recognize if you're under attack? We've talked about some of those things. So maybe the computer won't start as normally as it would, like the blue screen of death, we've all seen that. The system repeatedly crashes for no obvious reason, or the internet browser wants to go to unknown web pages or unwanted web pages. Antivirus software appears not to be working. And you might have pop-ups, all these pop-ups coming up on your screen, or you can't use your mouse. So these are some of the common ways that you can recognize if you're under attack. If any of these happen, turn off straight away. Whatever you do, just turn it off straight away. It's pretty easy just to call up your IT company to verify that everything's okay rather than the alternative. And I'll give you another example. We had a member who came into the practice on a weekend morning just to catch up on some of his admin work, to review results that came in overnight, blah, blah, blah. And when he came to turn on the computer, the screen went black. It wasn't working as it normally did. And he said that he just felt that something wasn't right. So after about a minute, he turned it off. And even within that short time, malware had infiltrated his network and the practice lost patient data. Now, thankfully, due to his fast thinking and turning off the computer, they only lost 1 week's worth, but it highlights how fast these hackers can get in. Evelina, how am I going for time?
Hi, Karen. You have 8 minutes to go.
Okay.
So how many slides?
6.
Okay. All right. We'll do
it. So what to do if you're attacked? So another real life example from one of our practices was when they turned up to the practice on a Monday morning to find all their computer screens with this message from the hackers stating that they encrypted their files and were demanding a ransom. And lo and behold, right at the same time, patients were walking into the practice for their appointments. Put yourself in their shoes. What do you do? What do you do now? What do you do? Well, first of all, you contain the breach. Your immediate action should be turn off all computers, remove the power cord from the wall, and do not connect to the backup at all. Do not connect any portable devices such as laptops to your network. Call your IT service provider. They will help you understand the incident, how it can be contained and eradicated, and how to avoid the attacks from moving to other computers in the practice. Then you'll need to evaluate the breach and the risk of harm. So your IT provider will aim to identify all the files that have been encrypted or modified and when the attack occurred. And this will allow you to target the relevant backup data to be retrieved as quickly as possible. So your IT provider can also check if a decryption key is accessible due to weaknesses in the malware, and this can be used to restore your access of your files. Now, if you are an Avant practice policy holder, we want you to contact us too, or even if you're a practitioner policy holder, contact us because we'll be able to assist you. If you have a practice policy with us, you do have complimentary cybersecurity cover. So we can get you in touch with IT specialists straight away, forensic specialists. You may also wish to contact the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, who can assist in managing cybersecurity incidents. And if the breach appears to be of criminal activity, it will be generally appropriate to notify the police. But if you suspect that there's been a breach, you will need to assess within 30 days whether or not a notifiable breach has occurred, and we'll discuss that shortly. So, can you still see patients? Yes, you can. So just because you have a lack of access to their electronic medical records, there's no reason why you can't see patients. And I'll provide you with some tips. And these tips can be found in our fact sheets, which I said that Julie will provide. So if the appointment system has been lost, patients will start turning up at an unexpected time. So you take their details and confirm the time of their appointment in a manual diary. Explain to the patients that there is an IT issue and the medical record system is unavailable, so it will be necessary to obtain some background information from them. Now, each patient, and this is important for the doctors on the call, each patient must be seen as a new patient. Do not rely on your memory of the patient's history. For our admin staff on the line, when an existing patient calls to make an appointment, request that patient to bring the medications that they're currently taking along with them in the consultation, so the doctor can write a current medication summary. During the consultation, take the history from the patient, check for allergies before medications are prescribed. You can check if any pathology or imaging results are outstanding. You can ask the patient. You can contact your regular referral pathology or radiology practices. Document your notes in paper-based records and secure those paper-based records in a filing cabinet or cupboard to abide by the privacy obligations, because we certainly don't want another privacy breach. Keep the clinical staff updated on a regular basis. So for the practice managers, keep all the staff updated and give them an estimate on how long those systems will be unavailable, and provide the staff with notepads, script pads, what have you. And it's good practice to have all of those things in place somewhere in your practice. So, because like I said, it's not if it will happen, it's when it will happen. So it's important that you have those in place. And depending on the type of attack that has occurred, you will need to commence retrieving data from other sources, such as, you know, your regular specialists that you refer to, your radiology pathology clinics. You might have to access information from other sources like Medicare, My Health Record, or hospitals. So should you pay the ransom? Well, the police and the Privacy Commissioner do not recommend that the ransom is paid, as it encourages further attacks. And there is no guarantee that the records will be decrypted if the ransom is paid. And we've seen mixed results around this. And Telstra Cybersecurity did a report back in 2017 that surveyed Australian businesses. And they found that roughly 1 in 3 of those who gave into ransom demands did not recover their files following payment. And in fact, paying the ransom identifies you as a compliant victim, increasing the risk that you may be further targeted by ransom operators in the future. Now, there is some other suggested considerations by Alan's law firm if you are thinking about paying the ransom, and we can put that in the links as well due to the time constraints. So you should already have a data breach response plan established. And if you don't, you certainly will develop one after tonight's presentation, won't you? And you would need to implement your data breach response plan as required under the notifiable data breach scheme, to determine if the breach needs to be notified to the Privacy Commissioner and to the patients. So in order to consider if a privacy breach has occurred, a breach will be notifiable if there is unauthorized access or unauthorized disclosure or loss of personal information held at your practice where unauthorized access or disclosure is likely to occur, if the breach is likely to result in serious harm to one or more individuals, and if your practice has been unable to prevent the likely risk of harm with remedial action. And that's an important one. Because if the data remains encrypted and it's not being used by the hackers, and then the breach will not necessarily cause serious harm. But you should, or your management should, appoint a staff member to undertake an assessment of the breach and document all the steps taken to investigate the data breach and the loss. So the Privacy Commissioner has some fact sheets to assist you through this process. And once again, we'll send through those links. Okay. So as I said previously, Avant practice policy holders do have complementary cybersecurity insurance. And it's important for you to know if your practice policy covers cybersecurity, or if you have separate cybersecurity insurance to cover you for all of those things that are on the screen. Now, I won't read them out. And if you are interested in Avant practice policy, please reach out to Julie. All right, so what to do after the breach? So your response is more important than the breach itself in terms of your reputation. So you really need to focus on the patient, because understandably, many of us are very worried these days regarding privacy breaches, and it's about being empathetic to them. So move quickly and thoroughly to investigate the facts of the matter, so you do not over or under report the number of affected individuals and other details. And it's important to contact your patients quickly so as to prevent further privacy breach or contamination of their personal computer systems. So we had a practice just last week who was hacked, and the hackers obtained email addresses of 7,000 patients. And they sent out emails to these patients imitating the medical practice. Now, they sent out an attachment asking the patients to complete the form, which was requesting a great deal of personal sensitive information. And some of the patients went, oh, hang on, is this a legitimate email? They replied to the email saying, is this email legitimate? And because they replied, it went back to the hackers. And of course, the hackers went, yes, this is a legitimate email. And so those patients complied and fully completed the forms. Now, the practice found out about this fairly quickly because they had other patients calling them saying, what is this email? However, they didn't notify the other patients quickly enough. And it was 6 days later. And now they have a huge privacy breach in which they've had to notify the privacy commissioner. So it's important to act in a timely fashion to prevent further data loss. And don't forget to tailor your message to your audience and be empathetic, like I said, to your patients, because you don't want to aggravate them even further, because it's already hard enough as it is knowing that their personal data has been breached. And don't blame elsewhere. Be accountable and show your competence by demonstrating your practice has taken this seriously and what steps have been taken to remedy the breach, and ensure you have taken steps to prevent future occurrences. And be transparent, explaining the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. It's necessary to preserve patient trust while simultaneously respecting patient privacy and other regulatory matters. All right, so here's an example of a practice who had a cyber attack, and they were using their website to update their patients with what was going on. All right, so lastly, it's important to employ IT experts, guys, to help you with this complex area of your computer systems, because really, as much as we like to think that we're all over it, we just don't have the time to be managing and updating and being across it all. So employ experts to help you. Consider cyber insurance, because it's not if you'll be hit, it's a when, and you need to have that expert advice and people to help you along that journey and to cover you in regards to that. And don't forget, you need to have ongoing vigilance and training. So go back to my era. I wasn't vigilant that day, or that other practice when they opened up the remittance advice because they didn't look in the email or at the email address. You have to be vigilant all the time. And part of that vigilance is training a staff. It's kind of like doing your basic life support every year or doing your WHS. It's like you're doing it all the time, and so you've always got it in your front of your mind. And lastly, backup. It's so important. I did forget to say that it's important to be aware that if you do have a privacy breach, that the practice may still be hit with the costs of that liability. So a privacy breach fine can be up to $1.8 million for a corporation, and $360,000 for an individual. So it's important to keep that in mind. And that's it.
Oh, thank you, Karen. That's
Sorry for running over time.
No, that was excellent. You are so good that you've answered most of the questions online already. Yeah, which was really good. I have just one in here that it's if you have any tips on how to record and manage all the many passwords that we have to have for these things these days.
Can you say that again?
Any tips to manage all the many different passwords that we have to remember?
Oh, yes. Oh, the passwords. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Okay. Well, that's a really good question. There are programs that do that for you. Certainly they need to be protected as well, securely protected. But I do think that if you're using those strong passphrases, so phrases that you'll remember. So for example, I like pineapple on my pizza. You know, it's a little bit easier to remember, but there are certainly applications that do that for you. You know, we're not big advocates for writing in a notebook, but if you need to, then you need to be making sure that's very secure.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yeah, and yeah, that was the last question that we had for tonight. I would like to thank you, Karin, for your brilliant presentation, very comprehensive. It was very good. Thank you for your time, and also for Julie for assisting in the background. And thank you also to everyone for attending. Please visit our website to view upcoming events. Our website will be updated regularly as new events are confirmed. And don't forget to complete the online evaluation before you switch off tonight. Thank you again, everyone, and have a good rest of night. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.